Welcome to Paddy's Say, our regular chat with Swindon trainer Paddy Fitzpatrick. Paddy, there's been some talk lately about terrestrial TV getting their hands on some boxing action. That would be fantastic especially for the people who haven't got Sky, don't want, pay for their boxing on pay-per-view. What's your thoughts on that one?
It'd be massive, wouldn't it? I understand pay-per-view for the huge fights, but I'm not a fan of it for regular fights. I'm not a fan of paying for Sky just to get regular fights, or Box Nation, any of them. But they all, they all serve a good purpose too. Even me saying that. But terrestrial TV is kind of where you build stars, and then for the stars then to go on to these big showcases, the pay-per-views and whatsoever, that makes sense, because then the men involved get paid and rewarded the way they should be for being involved in these fights. But terrestrial TV is what built the Haglers and the Hearns and the Leonards, being on NBC and all that in the early 80s, and that was what built them. And there's far more people, let's face it, millions watch terrestrial TV as opposed to hundreds of thousands watching Sky and the other ones. So it's a great way to build new talent coming through.
Most of these fights these days seem to be pay-per-view. You got the Frampton Quigg, you had Dillian White, Joshua, and we spoke about the Dillian White, Anthony Joshua one, and I was surprised it was pay-per-view. But I think Eddie Hearn justified it in the end and said, "Wow, it did massive numbers." So you can't kind of argue with pay-per-view on that basis, can you?
Well, he's a salesman. He sold it to us, suckered us, we bought it. Anthony Joshua is a huge star. The Olympics were in London. He got the gold medal in London. He's got a massive following for a dude who's only had 15 fights, an absolutely massive following. So he's a huge star. Do I think a British title fight should have been pay-per-view? No, I don't think so at all. I don't agree with it. But can I disagree with Eddie Hearn when he says, well, whatever, 300,000-400,000 people bought it, and then you can't disagree with him either. That's huge money. It's over 6 million quid. It's 15 quid a pay-per-view buy, and 400,000 people bought it. It's a whole heap of money there. So, do I agree with it? No. Can I disagree with him? No. I can't, because he sold it.
When should a fight be pay-per-view, in your opinion?
In my opinion, when it can't get made out any other way. When it's a fight where both guys have other options, and their other options are going to earn them handsomely. So why do they have to risk the other fights that they have making good money against fighters with a bigger risk for the same reward? So then when it's a bigger risk but the reward is far more financially to them, then that justifies it being pay-per-view. These super fights.
If boxing was to come back onto terrestrial TV, just what could that do for the reputation of boxing, which at the end of the day it's not as big as something like football. You're always battling against,
You're battling against football if you want to be as big as football, and I know everyone would think, well, we would like it to be as big as football, but it doesn't need to be in order to still be massively and hugely successful. There's probably more money in boxing back here at the moment than in America. There's hundreds of thousands of dollars to be on HBO. But if you look at Quigg and Frampton this weekend, they're earning millions. So, and yes, you can get pay-per-view in America, but then same thing, there isn't a load of people get pay-per-view in America. So there's just as much money here. Boxing is on the rise. Boxing is probably doing better than it's ever done on these shores. It's doing better than it's ever done in Ireland. We're doing really good right now. And with the stars and with the talent that we have, it should continue to grow and get bigger. I'd love to see terrestrial television for all of these guys that are coming through now, turning over pro, 5-0, 10-0, 15-0, on their way through, fighting for British titles, fighting for Southern Area titles, getting behind a man from the beginning of his career, so that by the time he is fighting for the big fights, he already has a good following, as opposed to you're paying, a lot of the time pay-per-view is, you're thinking, well, I ain't seen that dude fight. You might have seen one or the other, but you haven't seen them both. But building your product with the general public from the very beginning, and then trying to turn a good percentage of those people on the terrestrial over then into bigger stars down the road. I think terrestrial television is a fantastic tool to help do that.
That's exactly the question I was going to ask you, was bearing in mind, you know, in association with Keith Mayo, you put on a lot of shows now, and there's just no way that you could get TV, you know, the likes of Sky, Box Nation to come and cover these shows unless there was probably minimum of a British title, you know. And if terrestrial TV were to come in and cover these small hall shows, that could be massive for the promoters, for the boxers, in a world that is extremely hard to actually make a penny out of small hall shows, because that's the reality, isn't it?
Reality is most small hall shows are lucky if they break even. Extremely hard thing to do. And then you're hoping that one or two of your fighters that you're focusing on break through. And even when they do break through, the first few big purses they get is probably only paying off the losses you made as you were grooming them. You know, you're trying to sell a product. You could have the best product in the world, but if nobody knows it exists, ain't nobody going to buy it. So you have to get the product out there to the masses of people in order for them to then get behind your guy and make him then financially worth something. Because bums and seats is what earns you money. You could be a fighter that was not all that talented whatsoever, but if you could sell, let's extreme it here, if you could sell 100,000 tickets every time, there isn't a promoter in the world that wouldn't find you somebody to beat every time you fight. You could be the most talented fighter in the world, but if you can't sell a ticket, there ain't a promoter in the world that would be interested in you. They don't care. Because even if you say, yeah, but I can beat that champion. Yeah, but then when you beat that champion who's worth some money, now you're a champion who's not worth enough money because you can't sell seat tickets anyway. And the guy that was worth money, I've just knocked him off the perch. Don King used to sign fighters years ago, and they'd get excited because he signed them. But he only signed them to stick them on the shelf. He only signed them to keep them embroiled in legal battles. So they'd be saying, we're supposed to be fighting. Yeah, take me to court. Because they weren't worth anything. And they were a danger to his guy that was worth something. So terrestrial television, you know, any of them, you look at the managers of the 70s, the 60s, the 50s, the 80s even, they were men that were constantly getting their fighters out there, getting them in the public eye. If it wasn't in the ring fighting, for doing something else in the community. But getting the community behind you first of all, and then trying to broaden that. That's what we're doing here with Keith and myself, with the likes of Duke and Sniper and Kelly and the likes of that, you know, collectively we're working together to get them attention, to then broaden that attention, and then hopefully broaden the base that they have that they're selling to. And then the talent is what you want to develop in order to be able to get them to win titles. But like I say, when you are ready then to win titles, you have to have a following behind you so that you can have some kind of say at the negotiating table. It's no good being a good talent and nobody knows you.
It would be great if it could, you know, boxing could come to terrestrial TV, but things are never that simple. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the way it works is that all of these boxers have loads of different deals. You know, the big ones, the boxers we want to see on TV, like your Amir Khans and Cal Brooks and things like that, they all have different contracts with different promoters and different television organisations. So it's not actually going to be an easy deal to strike for ITV, who are the ones that are talking about doing it.
I see your point, but then if you look at, say, Box Nation, they put on their own fighters, Frank Warren fighters, let's say, and then they also put on cards from other promoters. If you look at Eddie Hearn now, they're going to start doing a bit of business with Team Mayweather, and they already show fights from Sauerland. So it does make sense to air fights from other promoters, especially if it's going to build into something. And on the terrestrial level, it would actually make sense, and it would be up to those men to decide it made sense to them. But it would make sense for ITV to put on fights for Eddie Hearn and Warren and Hatton Promotions, and and putting on those, because it's like, okay, I'll tell you what, I'm going to put on fighters to you that I've signed that aren't yet a big name. They weren't a big name in the amateurs, but they're a good talent. I believe in them. They're going to make it. But instead of me putting them on Sky TV, because they're not a big name yet, putting them on Sky TV where there's hundreds of thousands of people will be watching them, I'll do a 5-6 fight deal with you in terrestrial TV and put them on. And now if he, for example, was a light heavyweight, and then Warren was putting on guys in a similar token, and Hatton and the other promoters out there, Hennessy, well then you're watching Eddie Hearn's guy one week, you're watching Hatton's guy the next week, and you're watching these guys thinking, can't wait for these guys to fight. These guys are building together. It's building towards something. Now then, when it gets to being a good enough reason for them to face each other, then it would be down to Sky and everyone else to bid and who gets that fight. But whoever wins the bid is obviously the higher bid. So within reason, everyone should be happy enough then that even if it was Warren's people going on Sky or vice versa, that okay, he's not on our channel now for this fight, but he's only on their channel because they bid more than we did. So it's financially rewarding to the fighter. So if ITV took that kind of format and got the bigger guys putting their fresher guys, newer guys on their channels, and then hopefully have a percentage of their viewing time as well for the smaller hall promoters, the likes of Keith and that are doing shows. But there's a lot of small hall promoters there, so then it has to be that you have got somebody. You can't just have a show that has one fighter fighting a guy and then the rest of the fights fighting losing records. It has to be a good show. They're not going to come down and just film your main event. It has to be a good show. So if you're able to put on a good show, no reason why they couldn't get involved too.
And on that basis, do you think they do good, viewing figures?
They're going to do good viewing figures, brother, if they put on boxing, period. Boxing is on the rise. People talk about it dying out. It'll never die. It's the rawest sport, closest thing to nature. And usually in times of recessions and depressions back in the 1920s and all that, boxing just gets stronger. It doesn't go away. And it's doing better than it's ever done now. So if you're asking me, are people going to then turn on ITV to watch it? Of course they will. Why wouldn't they? If they, lots of people have Sky, lots of people subscribe to Bog Nation. I do both. But what I'm saying is, why wouldn't you want to turn on your regular TV and watch a good fight and see tomorrow's champions building? Look at the Leonards, look at the Haglers, look at the Hearns. They all came through it that way. NBC every Saturday afternoon watching them. It was great.
And the bigger picture is, you're reaching out to new boxing fans.
Millions instead of hundreds of thousands. Millions. That can only be good for the sport as a whole.
So you'll be watching this one quite closely to see how it develops and hoping that they can get a deal done.
Yeah, well, it was you that I had read the headline for it, and I hadn't actually got into reading the story yet, and then you mentioned it to me, so I don't know how close they are to it. How close they are? What was it?
I think they're a long way away from it, but I think it's something that'll be discussing over the coming months. But they're talking about June possibly, for it all starting. So, fingers crossed, I guess.
Yeah, man, fingers crossed. That'd be cool. If it happens that soon, that's great.
Well, thank you once again, Paddy, for joining us, and we look forward to next week.
God bless.
Thank you.
Peace.